Hey, team players, and welcome back. So here we are. It is the playoffs. We know we got, well, it's the Monday Night Miracle to get into the playoffs, but most of you guys know you're already in it. Here to take it off, answer your comments, because this is all about taking your teams to finally get the playoffs to start and taking them into championship mode and make it happen. Love that we got a ton of questions for all you regulars. Steve, we're starting up with you. Josh Allen, 51 points, dude. How crazy was that? Down by 6, still have Chase Brown to play, and he has the kicker. You think I went, dude? I totally think you're getting that bye, Steve. Chase Brown's giving you at least double digits, and you guys know my feelings on kickers. They don't really exist. So you guys got that going. Also, Allen, A-Chain, Chase Brown, St. Brown, DJ Moore, Janu, and Pacheco in my flex, with my bench being Amari Cooper, Hopkins, Pacheco, QJ, and Njoku. Do I need to use any of these guys moving forward? Dude, I think your starting lineup is your starting lineup. It's a great one. I think you're in a good spot. Hopkins is starting to turn up a little bit, so you're going to have that debate between the two Kansas City guys, but it's a great problem to be in, Steve. I'm really liking where you're at. Really loving your bye situation here. And, you got to get the rest of this week off. That's something to love. So yeah, I mean, you're in a good spot there, Steve. Love it. Welcome, Jesse. Landon Brown. I'm up to 6. I have Higgins and the opponent has Ferguson. How am I looking? Well, first off, you're winning, and you got the guy who's going to score more points. So that just means you're going to win by more, my man. I think you're in a good spot tonight. This is going to be a super great kickoff. Welcome to the playoffs. Things are going to be good for you, my man. All right, if Chase Brown stays under 31, I make the playoffs in 2 out of 3 leagues, if not just in 1. I think you're pretty good shape of him not cracking 31. I mean, realistically speaking, what do you got to do to have that? You got to have 10 catches. That gets you down to 21. Call it 110 yards. That takes you down to 10 left, and you would need 2 touchdowns. So 10 catches, $110, and 2 touchdowns. That seems a little high fetch for a team that's going to be throwing it like crazy. So I think you're in pretty good shape there, Austin. Final 2 trades before the playoffs coming up after this week. Welcome, Bob.
Oh, before we get to that.
I already started there, Bob.
I know, but Steve,
I'm coming right down the list.
I was thinking about you, Steve. I was thinking when Allen went off, I just remember all of the discussions that we've had over the course of the year of people wanting to trade out of Allen earlier in the year and then trading into Jane Daniels. And one of the reasons why, a lot of people didn't want to trade into Jane Daniels or anything is because Josh Allen is Josh Allen. And we've seen people this week go off and quarterbacks go off and be duds. And I'm just happy you kept them. I've been thinking about it. I'm just happy you kept them. It was a beautiful night to own Josh Allen. So nice.
It was. It was.
Back to the question.
So right here what landed. Trading away KW3, AJ Brown, and Mixon to receive Bijan and Jamar Chase. I love that trade. I hope you're able to get it through in time. That is the kind of stuff you do. Consolidate down to upgrade. It is the great play to do it. That's what we want to see.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I mean, with the injury to Ken Walker, I mean, it doesn't really, personally, if I was the Seattle Seahawks, it really doesn't make any sense to put Ken Walker back in after the performance that Charbonnet had yesterday and the way that the team looked completely different when he was in. There was a spark.
It did.
And it doesn't track. I would do that all day. I don't know if somebody would do that, but if that was offered to you, I would do that in a heartbeat. If somebody offered me Bijan and Jamar, yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then also traded and Kamara for Jacobs, Little, and Guerrero.
Yeah, I mean, for Jacobs and Kittle and Guerrero, I think that when we look at this,
that's Kittle. Dude, I read Little. My bad.
And what Joe said a couple weeks ago about Kamara is continuing to ring true. Granted, he could have a blow up game here or there, but one of the things that Joe said is that it's going to be it's not going to be a great time over the course of the whole season to own Kamara after a couple of blow-up games. He has not had a touchdown in 7 games, guys. Granted, he's had good performance. He's had some good performance metrics. He's been getting some good yards, as we all thought was going to happen. But the touchdowns aren't there. There's nothing happening in the touchdown market. Jacobs is getting yards and is in the touchdown market. I think that doing that, if I was able to get those guys, yeah, 100%, man. Do that. So the lineup now looks like Jalen Hurts.
Love getting Kittle on your roster, dude.
Bijan, Jacobs, Kittle, and Lett. Dude, that's a huge.
That's a championship.
Man. You just moved a bunch of pieces. I'm surprised, and this is why I'm a huge proponent of the deadline being until the playoffs, because people are strategizing and making their teams better. I mean, if you're fighting at 6 and if you're, and Joe, you can speak on this too. If you are having a week, if your trade deadline is say like week 10, right? And at that point in time, you're still solid, but then an injury happens and you're not solid anymore. Week 11, it's not competitive anymore. Like, I mean, I know a bunch of players in fantasy leagues that basically give up if they don't have a chance.
Yeah.
Keeping your deadline
to that point, that's why I think it's so important to be. This is why it's so important to be able to trade future assets, whether it be a keeper league where you have some form of reason to keep players, or to be able to have future draft capital be better for you, because it really does diminish the I quit vibe. I mean, you can still be out and selling your team, but building it up for next year, there's nothing wrong with that. Team I had Rishi Rice, I had like 17 injuries, like every person every week in September. Yeah. I lost another one. I sold it out. I got 3 first-round picks out of it, 2 seconds, a 4th, and a 7th moving forward. And guess what? I'm going to win the league the next 2 years. Draft capital. So you can take a down year and turn it into a dynasty. Much easier in fantasy football than you can in real life. Just ask those Chicago Bears. I'm about to be 8 and 6. Going to be tied with a guy in 4th. So he was 8 and 6 before me. Jesse, it's going to come down to head-to-head record and who has more total points. That's how tiebreakers work.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah, I mean, when you really look at it, there was a lot of player performances this week that were within the bounds of metrics. Joe talked a lot about Juwan Jennings. We talked a lot about also performers that went under expectations. We were accurate in assuming Will Levis's numbers would be where they were, and they were within terms of the pass attempts. Tony Pollard's running attempts were within his boundary as well. But a lot of really poor performances. Again, Jonnu Smith was unknown to Tua in the first 2 halves of the game. It took until overtime for him to get 3 or 4 receptions in that game. So a lot of performances were where you're betting on volume. That volume didn't happen, or it happened in a different capacity. Again, we went on air this last week, and I said, AOC was one of my favorite quarterback plug and plays this week. He had a fumble, an interception, but then he got hurt. But if you look at the numbers, Joe, and you take what I said, and I said, if he's able to get 30 plus pass attempts, he should be okay. If you combine the pass attempts between him and Ritter, it was 32. So if he would have gotten in 32 pass attempts, there is a very good chance that script for AOC would have been different. Same thing went for Myers. We said it is most likely he goes 6 for 60. He ended up doing that. And the thing goes as, like, when it comes to points, and I think that one of the good things about most leagues, and you can talk to your commission about this too, Jesse, is a lot of leagues are positioning themselves to doing one of 2 things in the near future. The first thing people are positioning themselves to do is to do 2 metrics to lead to the playoffs. So the first metric is your head-to-head record. So, if it's a 12-team league, the first 4 positions.
The first is your record.
Are going to record. Then in the second part, it is total points. So, for example, if the 4 top teams don't have the best total points, but then, you have another team that has the highest total points, but they're sitting down there in 10th because they had a bad strength of schedule. A lot of commissions are utilizing this to say, well, those next two highest scoring teams get the 5th and the 6th position.
The two wild cards.
And
Yeah.
I think that's something. Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of leagues are looking out for now. Because many of us are either walking into the playoffs right now or our season is over, but we still want to think fantasy football, and we want to say, like, how can we make changes to leagues? And it sucks because Austin here, to Austin's point, when you're on the back end side of a Josh Allen 50 bum, the Jamar 50 bum, the Saquon 45, you look at it and you say, well, I could have done better, but I can't do that much better. It's hard to predict
That's right.
when teams are going to have 50. It's a struggle. And to CC's point here too, some guys you look out and you say, okay, well, metrically this should be a great game. Just speaking a little bit to Jordan Addison, for example. Jordan Addison was a guy that we weren't fully on this week, but we also weren't pish-poshing as well. He comes out, puts up 45 points. The matchup was great for him. Puts up 45 points, but walking into that, Drake London has just a good matchup. He ended up with like 9, right? So you look at this, and as a decision maker, I think when we look for the playoffs here, Joe, and when we look to the future, and Trone with a 9-5 record after being 2-5, you're always going to remember to take.
Sean, that's why you got to join us in the off season, not just in week 7. Well, we're glad we're able to help you out, man.
And thinking about it and saying, like, we've had people tune in and we're going through it and thinking about all of these teams, how they've changed over the course of the last couple of weeks. Some trades, and this is what sucks. I swear to God, Joe, and I said this to Paul a bunch of times. I swear that my words sometimes are poison, because every
always
single
felt
guy,
that.
But listen,
because you're a Longhorns
every single
fan,
guy, right? But listen, earlier this year, talking up James Cook, right? Dude ends up hurting his toe, coming back, healthy, pretty good. This week, talking up AOC. AOC should have had a great game. Ends up in an air cast. Like, Rashee Rice, talking him up. He goes and, like, breaks his leg. Pacheco, same deal. I mean, I cannot sometimes. I mean, the law of the averages, it evens itself out. But again, George Pickens,
think you just love too much, Bob. You love too many, and just the law of injuries kills you.
Oh, but speaking of injuries, if you're in a dynasty or a keeper league or whatever, Jonathan Brooks is out again. Re-injuring, re-tearing, or whatever happening with his knee. He could be a buy low candidate if you're looking to buy someone really, really low, looking into a dynasty league. People are going to be super down on him, but that news just broke today.
He also could be a hard bust candidate, Bucky, so don't spend a lot.
But also, too, Joe, Bucky Irving. They said today in the report, it goes, they want him to. They're working on him to untighten his back. So basically, they're trying to get him uninjured from where he's at right now. So he's injured as well.
Yeah.
For those Rachaad White holders, it paid off. So Steve, with my bench being Hopkins, Cooper, Pacheco, QJ, and Njoku, Hopkins and QJ both going for a touchdown last night. That was really nice. Do I need to use any of these guys going forward?
I don't think so.
Except for Allen, my bench outplayed my whole lineup. Yeah, I mean, DJ Moore, St. Brown had pretty unremarkable games. Jonnu Smith came through in the back end. Pacheco had an unremarkable game as well. With my bench being Hopkins, Cooper, Pacheco, QJ, and Njoku, do I need to use any of these guys going forward? I think you could walk yourself into a discussion, Steve, where it can continue to be viable for you to play Hopkins. There's a real generous discussion.
Yeah, you can talk me into benching DJ Moore when he's at home.
Mm-hmm. Like in bad weather, if the weather is sub 30 and the winds are brewing in Chicago, yeah, I could probably see myself benching DJ Moore. And the fact remains, and it's everything that we've said about Caleb Williams is still true, in that, Roma Dunze is becoming a favorite target of Caleb Williams. Roma Dunze although he is becoming a favorite target, the thing about Caleb is have the pass attempts to support these wide receivers. DJ Moore is going to be a tricky start. But he still got points this past week. He still got points. So I think, yes, you are going to be using some of those guys going forward. I think Njoku is going to be someone you're going to utilize. And depending, and Joe, you can back me up on this one, or you can say anything to the contrary. It is very realistic to me.
Well, when I answered it the first time, Bob, my take was that's your starting roster, and you should be totally set with it. But you can definitely talk me into DJ Moore. DJ Moore gets benched whenever it's cold outside because Caleb Williams won't be able to throw it well in Chicago blister. But in general, I mean, you got yourself a very stacked lineup, Steve. You're also, like I said, you're going to have to buy this week, so you're going to be set. You're going to be set.
Yeah, and Trone, I was holding the Broncos defense through their bye. Would you drop the Broncos D for the Ravens D versus the Giants, or the Commanders D for the Saints with no Carr? Well, the Carr does have the fracture in his hand, but news reports are saying that he's going to give it a go, which makes
it's his non-throwing hand. Not so,
but I'm still keeping the Broncos. And I talked a little bit about Arizona last week. Arizona was disappointing. We talked a little bit about Buffalo last week. Buffalo was disappointing. But both of those teams are still capable of causing turnovers. And the metric that Joe pointed out to you as being important this past week was how many points given up. Nobody was thinking that the Bills were going to give up that many points. We love Matt Stafford, but honestly, we didn't think that game was going to be that ham. We thought, both teams in the 20s, but both teams in the 40s, that's a little bit absurd. But when you look at it, the Broncos are still a viable defense because they're capable of causing turnovers.
Oh, Carr's also in concussion protocol on top of the fractured non-throwing hand. Carr's always a mess.
But I will say, though, it would be an opportune time for either of those two defenses that you have listed too. I don't think any of those defenses you can go wrong. I like the Broncos more because of the ability to turn over the ball, but I like the matchup more for the Ravens because the Ravens have the capability of just keeping the ball on the ground, similar to the Commanders as well, and just running that game out. We saw that the Giants truly, outside of Tracy, have no offense with this quarterback situation happening. And with the Saints, we saw them with Rattler or Hayner, whoever they decide to start at running back, them struggling as well. Juwan Johnson had a good game. That was something we looked at this past week as well. But again, when you look at these situations, I don't think you could go wrong with any of these defenses this next week, Trone. It all depends on what you're looking for. If
so, Trone, the way I would look at this is first off,
it's the Ravens.
So I definitely do not want to cut the Broncos. You've already done a lot to keep them on your roster. And in week 16, the Broncos are a better play than the Ravens. That being said, for this week, this moment in time, Ravens off their bye is the best play this week in terms of defenses. But I do not want to cut Denver in extent of getting Baltimore because I don't think it's that tangible. If you have another guy on your back end that's giving you nothing, you're going to bench anyway. That's who I want to cut to pick up the Ravens. But the Ravens certainly are worth some fab for this week in this win or go home playoffs. Ravens are going to give some people a W. Quincy.
Hey, Joe, I know it was the end of the Comcast era, but the Verizon era is not starting out better.
Oh, no, yours is completely shooting the bed. Mine is crystal clear. This is a your side thing, Bob. Your Wi-Fi is not working at all.
I can't. I can see you just fine though. You keep
it's a your device side, Bob.
I don't know.
I'm actually watching it on the simulcast. It's your side, dude. But nonetheless, I don't know how to fix your device. But first place, 10-3, on the way to 11-3. Got 200 points. He's got Chase Brown and $180, and you still have. So yeah, you have CeeDee Lamb, who's going to score more points than Chase Brown, and a 20-point edge. Quincy, you're 11-3. You can go home, have some beers. You're going to love it because that's what you're at.
Yeah, truth. Craig, I'm winning with 5 points needed for Lamb tonight. Moving forward with Pickens, should I still keep Pickens? Yeah, I think that Lamb's going to get those 5 points tonight. I can easily talk myself into at least 3 catches and at least 30 yards from Lamb tonight. And speaking of Pickens, yeah, you keep going with Pickens, absolutely. You keep going with Pickens, absolutely. Although he's not going to play this next week, but in the AFC matchups that are coming down the pipeline, it is going to be an important thing for Pickens to be healthy and playing. Because as you saw with the Steelers, Joe, you were at the game yesterday. Looks a little bit different, right? Mm-hmm. The team looks a little bit different without Pickens. Russ doesn't have that kind of luster without a really good wide receiver moving downfield.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That even though they were able to obviously put up the 27 against Cleveland, it was a much less potent offense without Pickens. Pickens is the key to that passing game. There is no way around it. QH, or in terms of that, I don't really, or in terms of quick hitter, you want to keep Pickens. You definitely need to keep on to him. I'm not worried about QJ stepping up last week. As I read your question, they're wrong inside my head. And Austin, this is a good point. Njoku could be a play potentially over Jonnu. I just don't think you're going to be able to actually pull that trigger. And the reason is Jonnu's ceiling is max. The Njoku's is up there too, but I just look at what Cleveland has coming down the pike. Cleveland has the potential of just getting shut down. But you're right. When they play the Bengals, you almost have to play everyone against the Bengals.
Yeah, so here's what I'll say to this end. I think week 16, Njoku is a definite possibility here, because you look at it, and this is something that when you go in and you consume any fantasy content, it's something that is really, really apparent, is that most teams play 2 high safeties against Miami. The reason they do that is to stop both Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Yesterday, the Jets played single high safety majority of the time. And what happened? Well, we didn't have to throw the ball to Jonnu. Jonnu, half the time it didn't feel like he was on the field because, at one point in time, Jeremy Smythe got a reception over Jonnu Smith. But to that end, teams that play single high safety the majority of the time, if they don't adjust, will get beat by these wide receivers in Tua. Granted, and this is one of those things that we brought up about Tua's low ADOT, right? One of the things is time getting allowed to throw the ball. The other thing is that most of the time, these teams are playing 2 high safety. So where is he going to throw it? He's of course not going to throw it deep because he's going to get intercepted. Something's going to happen. But if you offer him a single high, he's going to see the field, read the field, and give it to the wide receivers. You saw Waddle and Hill have a great game. Comparatively to where they've been at most of the season. And Jonnu didn't fit into that framework. But if you have a team who's going to play 2 high safeties, Jonnu fits that market again. Now, one of the things that needs to be looked at here is that I believe Cleveland plays the Dolphins week 17, and I believe they run single high again. Maybe they adjust. Maybe they don't. But you just saw what happened to the Jets. It would behoove them to adjust. But I do think Njoku week 17 and potentially against Miami week 18 is a good play over Jonnu Smith. Primarily, I like
that is against Miami. That's right.
Primarily, I like Njoku against the Bengals because there's a very good chance that Winston will throw the ball 52 times. And there's a very realistic chance, even with Tillman.
Well, against the Bengals is a different story.
10 targets. I think that discussion definitely could be had. So, Quincy, you own
and
Kyron,
that's what
you have
leads
Denver
here to Quincy's question.
And you have the Titans. Would you drop the Titans defense and use Denver all the way and get my backup core for the playoffs? Quincy, I think that's a brilliant discussion.
No, I disagree with this, Quincy.
The Titans, Joe mentioned this. You agree with it or you don't agree with it?
No, I don't want to. I don't want to cut the Titans. You need to have a different defense this week. But you have Denver and the Titans. I think the combination of the two of them are great for your playoff run. The Tennessee is unstartable this week because you're not going to start Tennessee against the Bengals. Denver's a great start this week. Tennessee the following weeks against Indy and Jacksonville is a fantastic start. So we just saw them only let up 7 points to Jacksonville. So you look at that and go, you definitely want them in your championship. You want that Tennessee Jacksonville matchup. And then in week 16, you're going to be tossing up between Denver, who's playing the Chargers, or Tennessee playing the Colts. You're probably starting Tennessee that game. So the problem is if you cut the Titans now and you're in a league where anyone can pick anyone up, you're not going to get them back. The Titans are probably the second or third best defense next week. So I don't want to get rid of them at all, especially at the expense of having a backup that you're never going to put on your roster. Like you're using both of these two defenses. An ideal scenario, you will never start Corum. And quite frankly, if you needed to start Corum, it's because Kyren got injured during your playoffs, and you're not going to survive if Kyren gets hurt anyway. Like, you're at the point now where having Corum isn't an advantage for you. Having someone else's handcuff, on the other hand, yes. But having your own ain't going to help you at this point in the year. Having your own backup does not help you in your playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, like I agree with Joe on that respect. I could give you a discussion point where yes, it would be good to roll Corum, but the only thing that I say to that is this, and Joe said it so well, is that maybe you don't run the Broncos against the Chargers. Maybe you don't feel confident running the Broncos out later on in the season. I feel confident with the Broncos because they always have the chance at a turnover. But the discussion that Joe had is an accurate one, that at this point in time, it would be a good idea to hold on to an extra defense. My only question that I would have for you, Quincy, is that it really depends upon the market of defenses that are available out there. Is everybody holding two defenses? Is everybody holding a defense and a handcuff? Because if Kyren goes down, to Joe's point, yes, if Kyren's not going down, Corum is a wasted roster spot. I get it. I understand that. But at the same point in time, if he does go down, Corum does show the ability that he can. We saw 3 running backs this week. 4 running backs: Davis, Allen, Garendo, plus what's his name? Plus McCormick as well, and then Charbonnet as well, coming out, winning people games week 14 for the start of some people's playoffs. And then for some people, it's to get into the playoffs, and those guys paid off. And, we said this a couple weeks back about a guy like Charbonnet, that if you had Walker, there's no problem holding on to Charbonnet as well for as long as you did. And the same thing with Algier and Bijan Robinson. So I can make an argument for you, Quincy, that I wouldn't mind giving up the Titans, because the Titans aren't a valuable defense to me. I get that the matchup is good, and that, they only let the Jags let up 10 points and whatnot. But, I'm not 1,000% sold on the Titans to any degree. I think they're a good play, but I'm not like rushing out there. So if I could hold on the weeks that I'm not playing them and just do a continual add drop of the Titans and Corum just in case, I would. Because honestly, if everybody else's defense is set, the Titans aren't going to get picked up by anybody unless they're doing the same.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. If they're not going to pick up, but to my point though is, if Kyren goes down, you're not winning. So having Corum stashed doesn't help you. Yeah. Have someone else's backup stashed. So Armando, I just did the math of this in my head. 3 touchdowns is 12 points. 300 yards is 12 points. That gets you to 24. So basically, you need to have one of 2 things. You need to have then an additional, what would that be, 30 yards running, or the 4th touchdown. So is it possible to go 300 yards with 4 touchdowns? Yeah, it is possible to go 304 touchdowns out of Joey B tonight. Would I say it's likely? It's more likely than 3 touchdowns and him running for 30. So that's really the only scenario where I'm seeing him do it is 4 touchdowns, 300 yards in the air.
Yeah, and it's viable. I mean, it's not a definitive thing that will happen, but I think it's super viable, especially when you're considering what defense they're up against and the capability of Joe Burrow and the fact that he just is going to keep slinging it. I mean, it is very, very possible too that you could see 3 touchdowns passing and a rushing touchdown. You could also see a couple touchdowns, 2-point conversion, maybe somewhere along the line as well. But again, do I think it's likely? No, but I think it can happen. I mean, we saw Sam Darnold tear off 5 touchdowns yesterday after not like having a game above 2 touchdowns in a long time. So I mean, anything at this point in time in the season is possible. Are we concerned in any way about the Bills D stashing them to cover the Vikings D week 16, 17? Broncos in Atlanta are available. Thoughts? CC.
So wait, if we're only talking about week 16 and 17, I have no qualms against the Bills because the Jets quick and New England can't score. And plus, both those games are at home. It could be under a mile of snow. You know, like who's scoring in that?
Granted, the Jets had a good scoring performance. Aaron Rodgers came back from his grave, found Devontae Adams, found Garrett Wilson for a boatload of yards, boatload of receptions. But Joe's absolutely right. When you look at the Bills and when you look at the matchups that they're in, both of those games could potentially be bad weather. Both of those games, it's not like the Bills can't cause turnovers, though, guys. I mean, this was just a bad performance from a good turnover capable defense, and that is likely to happen to every team. But you got to ask yourself the question is New England going to beat the average of what they score in a given week? I mean, is it likely that New England gets 32 points? No. Is it more likely that New England gets less than 20? Yes. As it goes to the Jets, is it likely that the Jets continue to put up points in the nature that they put up against Miami? No. Is it likely that they could get a turnover with Aaron Rodgers in cold weather? Yeah. I mean, you're playing the odds, and I think it's smart to do that. I also conservatively, I do like Denver. Granted, I get that Denver's playing the Bengals week 17. But what I do like about that, and Joe Burrow is pretty good at taking care of the ball, but again, it's going to provide them with more opportunities to get turnovers. If the bread and butter of your defense is causing interceptions, and a team is going to throw the ball 40 plus times, we saw that this week with the Steelers versus Winston. Winston ended up throwing the ball 41 times, Joe, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. When you're out of it, quarterbacks don't care. I mean, there's a sense of pride, but at the same point in time, if you have a defense that can cause turnovers, I think that's brilliant. As it goes to Atlanta, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, if there was ever a spot that Atlanta could have done well.
Atlanta's good matchups, though. I mean, they're soft.
Granted, dude, but you saw that the matchup against Minnesota was one that they could have done well in, and they got trashed to the discussion of 6 total touchdowns. I know this because, as I said on air last week, I'd be rolling out the Minnesota kicker, and there was one opportunity for a field goal, and he missed it because he came back from being hurt, and then 6 extra points, which is crazy. If 2 of those drives turned to field goals, that would have been a brilliant day for the kicker, but they didn't. So, I mean, that Atlanta's not a possibility.
Atlanta's also never had a good defense. So, Quincy, to answer this question, the answer is as hard of a no as I can give you. Algier is one of 2 backups that has standalone value themselves. It's him and Charbonnet. Maybe Warren, but it's mostly him and Charbonnet. He is someone else's handcuff that you don't have. You absolutely do not want to downgrade to your own handcuff because, again, if Kyren does go down, you will be out of the playoffs regardless of whether you had the backup or not. But if Bijan would go down, you're going to win your championship. So you can't get, but you're not going to win a playoff game with a player down.
Okay, but
you're not going to know he gets hurt till the first quarter.
But I talked about this, and we were discussing this at the end of Thursday's episode with Mr. Wumbo, okay, where I was dogging, like we were talking about Sincere McCormick And I said, and KJ, I believe, asked, is he a viable running back 2 flex option? And I said, there is a pathway, if the coach speak is accurate, to be a viable running back 2 flex option. He was this week. He scored, 15 PPR points. He got the touches. I said yesterday, if he bumps up, or I said on Thursday, if he gets bumped up from 12 to 15 to 17 touches, he's going to be viable. He ended up getting 17 total touches in that game and was a viable option. What I'm sharing more so is that
I guess this is the backup, Bob. Do you think that's a flash in the pan, or do you think it's sustaining itself?
Well, that's the thing. I think that it could be a flash in the pan. But to the same discussion, you talked well about Corum a couple weeks ago, and you talked well about him last week and said, if they give him more opportunities, he will be worth keeping. I just want to reiterate what I've shared about Tennessee not being that great of an option to hold on to. So
let's get the Tennessee hate out of the way.
This year wasn't an Anthony led Indy.
Bob, you basically blacked out on your Tennessee hate. We're going to jump back to that.
Am I back yet?
You're back now. Here we go.
Okay. So Quincy, in this discussion here, Indy with 3 points. They got 3 points against Indy the last time. That game was 20-17. This week they ended up with 9 points against Jacksonville. Points for the score, points for some interceptions, and 1 point for a sack. The matchup is good enough, like Joe said, that if you wanted to play the Titans, you could. But I don't see a fundamental difference in the game between the Broncos versus the Titans. And I don't see a fundamental, like, if the Broncos get shellacked for, let's say, 28 points against the Bengals or 28 points against the Chargers, whatever that happens, there's a very real likelihood that they do cause a couple interceptions and that they do get some sacks. I mean, you're looking at the framework of the Titans here, and, the highest sack total that they've had is 4. They did that against Houston and against New England. But their highest point total, again, they've had weeks where it hits 10, 10, and 11. So, I mean, the pathway is there for them to be a nice, successful hold. But like Joe, to your point, Joe, about, if Kyren goes down in the middle of the game, of course you're not winning. But let's say you won, and then in practice, Kyren gets hurt, right? And then coming back in the next week 5, like say you win this week, week 16,
it would have to be a middle of the week injury, but that doesn't normally happen.
Kyren's
because
hurt.
What they're going to do is they're going to say it's a veteran day off.
It happens all the time. It's happened all the time this year. I mean,
most of the time they get hurt in game. They'll have a setback, but they were already injured in game. But to his bigger point, he already has Braylon Allen. So I'd rather ride with Allen and Algier and not pick up Corum. Like I said, we're still in a spot where Kyren has the better road forward.
I'm agreeing with you. But I just want to say that I think it is, unless you think, Quincy, that somebody is going to pick up the Titans at this point in time, most people have their playoff schedule of what defenses they want to play determined. And there's only 6 people in the playoffs. So more than likely somebody's holding Minnesota, somebody's holding the Broncos, somebody's holding Buffalo, somebody's holding Philly, somebody's holding the Steelers. And that discussion is over with. That's 5 defenses already, and people probably have another one that they're playing matchups for. That is 12 teams. The other 20 teams in the league, minus the bottom 7, are exactly the same to me as the Tennessee Titans.
Pretty much.
So I would rather pick up Corum in the off chance midweek somebody picks up a hammy, like has been happening a lot this year, or an ankle injury.
The hammy thing has happened.
And then can't go during the week, or it happens at the end of a game. Say something happens
Yeah.
and the player gets hurt at the end of the game, like Garendo and everybody else. I would rather have that because that running back, I feel just it's the same discussion though, to the same point like Joe was making, is that, you know, two running backs from the same team doesn't help you as much. But two defenses might. I mean, just as a framework discussion here, the Broncos' best week as a defense, they've had 2 weeks where they were the number one defense, 20 points. They have not launched a 0, and that's in even giving up. Their highest point total given up is 20. Their highest point total given up is 41 points to the Baltimore Ravens. And still, even in that game, they scored 3 points in a standard league.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to do CC's quick hitter and then jump into the deep dive, the first deep dive we have on the list. So dropped Otten finally for Charbs. Good.
Love
you have
that.
the Bills
Love
D,
that.
Jennings, Flowers, Breeze, Braylon, so the Jets, Pacheco, Bucker in the IR. So, guys, we don't need to talk about kickers. Do I need a backup for McBride? Any of these bench players worth dropping? So I don't think you need a backup for McBride, but if you can get one of the decent ones out there that would upgrade your roster above Otten, I get that. I also don't think Otten's the worst backup either. So do you need a backup for McBride? No, because in all probability, no one's picking up Otten, and that's what you would do anyways. So I'm okay with rolling out with what you got. I don't want to cut any of those guys for a tight end. I want to put that on the record. And so unless you got someone worse than that.
Yeah, and you've trimmed the fat to the degree that the players that you ended up getting are you know, Braylon Allen walked himself with that injury into a starting role. Charbonnet walked himself into that starting role as well. You know, looking at the team, there's nothing wrong with having those players on your roster. And McBride is performing, you know, outside of the first half of that game, McBride is performing at such a solid pace, isn't getting the touchdowns, but is getting huge volume. And the Arizona Cardinals have shifted into being a very pass focused team over the last 4 to 5 weeks. I just find that, you know, like to Joe's point, and we were just talking about Corum, that most tight ends, to Joe's point, aren't worth rostering more than one of them, unless you're holding on to, like, you know, say a Hunter Henry and a Jonnu Smith or something of that nature, where both of them are playable, or like a Kittle and, you know, and then Njoku, for some teams. You know, right now on your waiver wire, there's most likely nobody available outside of maybe Jawan Johnson, or Pat Freiermuth, who you would want to slot in over McBride. And if McBride, you know, it's good to have somebody, but, you know, I don't think you necessarily need to do it because, you know, nobody's out there really searching for a tight end, but they are searching for running backs. Nobody's out there searching for a tight end, but they are searching for running backs. So that's why I'm suggesting for Quincy to go after Corum, and why I'm not suggesting for you to go out there and get a backup for Trey McBride, because you're not starting Trey McBride. Yeah, and Quincy, to that end, my point more so isn't because of who you have. It's more about, also to this degree, is that what I just mentioned with CC about the backup tight end, nobody's out there looking for backup tight ends. They're looking for starting tight ends. If I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if Corum were to get a bigger workload for some reason, somebody would immediately go out there and pick him up. Okay? Immediately. No questions asked. But nobody's going to immediately go out there and pick up Elijah Higgins. Nobody's going to go out there and pick up Adkins right away. Nobody's going to go out there and pick up Foster Moreau or Michael Mayer right away. Yeah, granted, you know, it's 12 teams and an eight playoffs. Yes. So, you know, for me, if you want to hold the Titans, hold the Titans. But I would much rather in an 18 playoff, there is much more things that can go awry in the running back room. We've seen it over the last several weeks with all of these running backs getting hurt mid-game or getting hurt during the week, that Corum could win you a week if you know ahead of time that you have to play him. If you know ahead of time you have to play him. And I would much rather hold on to Corum than a defense whose highest output is of a caliber of a running back 3 ceiling. You know what I'm saying? Like the ceiling for Corum and the ceiling for the Titans is essentially the same. And if the floor, if I could plug in, and I was just saying ill of the Atlanta Falcons, for example. You turn in and you look at Atlanta and you say to yourself, okay, well, what is Atlanta's best output? Hold on, let me see this for a minute. Defense. I just want to get the points up here as best as I can. But you go out here and you look at a team like Atlanta, for example, or they totally got busted, but their lowest output in a given week is -3 points, but they were capable of putting up 11 points, 1 point, 3 points, 6 points. Again, that's like Tennessee. So a veritable hodgepodge of teams are out there for you to select from. And I feel it unnecessary that unless you're carrying 2 top caliber defenses, regardless of the matchup. I mean, like, Joe, let's be honest with ourselves. There are a couple games over the course of the last several weeks where we've put shitty defense A, and we talked about, how the juxtaposition of shitty defense A doesn't make that matchup any better in terms of the point production that team could get. If you don't get sacks, you don't get sacks. If you don't get interceptions, you don't get interceptions. It doesn't matter how shitty that team is. If you can't do it, then it doesn't matter. So, like, the Titans can do it. The Titans can do it. But again, I'm at this point now where we saw so many injuries this year that it would be irresponsible to not have him on your team right now at this point in time. And carrying the 2 defenses in your discussion here, Quincy, it's a valid point. And Joe, and to that end too, as we get to the next deep dive here, talking more about defenses, because that's the pivot point for a lot of teams. Everybody's pretty solid in terms of all around where they're at, but the defense is problem town because it is so variable, right? It is one of those positions that if you don't have a team that can cause turnovers, then it's going to be problematic for the future here. So Joe, let's talk to Jesse here about the question.
So between Lambs and Cook, who do I start? I'm scared of Lamb and getting hurt again at the same game. All right, so Jesse, as you know, one of the things with all of our longs that we did all off season long, we're kind of centric around 4 fundamental players: King Henry, Cooks, Myers, and Monty. And of which,
and
a horrible week for Henry to be on a bye. But we have roughly 5 lineups that are in flux of us making this second round or not, solely based upon Cooks. Cooks getting roughly 15 points to be more precise. Ladd being out really screwed us, but that's a side story, Bob. So that being said, we're all in on Cooks. So to tell you that as blankly as possible, we have our money is on Cooks, flat out, period.
Yeah.
Both in terms of the long play, which is what I just brought up here, but the short for tonight as well. But I think if they both play, I think they both can give you 18 plus.
And Jesse,
I think there's gonna be a stupid shootout. Cincinnati can't stop anyone. Yeah,
and Jesse, if I remember correctly, you had a bunch of great viable wide receivers, and on Saturday you sent in a question that asked about Westbrook Akine or Cooks, and in that question I did prefer Cooks over Westbrook-Akine because I saw a pathway. Now, both wide receivers had a pathway for 4 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. Westbrook-Akine didn't materialize that against a very bad defense. When you look at Cooks, it is a very realistic possibility that if Lamb can't go, that his pathway to 460 and 1 is up there. Again, he's coming off a season with 8 total touchdowns. He coming back, getting touchdowns. That's the thing. The quarterbacks want to get him in the red zone. So I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, it isn't unreasonable because I believe you also had like Jennings and Waddle and stuff to start as well. And you might have started those guys, which puts you into this discussion. But Lamb getting hurt again is a real possibility. I mean, it just is. The shoulder injury, it's a real possibility. But he is still the best player on the team. So I think it's likely that both of these wide receivers can have a good game. But I do think it is likely that Cooks will be a feature point or a focal point in this game. But I would be concerned about Jalen Tolbert's usage as well. Jalen Tolbert is faster, is younger. He could see a little bit more of the share here. And maybe you want to lean a little bit into Lamb despite the injury. Personal opinion, Joe gave the personal opinion on why Cooks is a good play. Schematically, the Bengals can't stop anything. So this will really come down to how many pass attempts I think Cooper Rush throws. I can easily see a pathway for Dowdle to get 21 carries in this game, probably 24 total touches in the game. Cooper Rush, on the other hand here, if he passes the ball over the last couple of games, so you're seeing 25, 23, 55, 32, 36. If he completes, and you're looking at a completion percentage of about, where is the completion percentage? 58%, 75%, 58%, 56%, 52%. So I feel like for Cooks to be super viable, notwithstanding a CeeDee Lamb injury, Cooper Rush at around a 60% completion rate, around 55%, is going to have to throw the ball at least 35 times. Okay? If he's able to throw the ball 35 times, even with the completion percentage sub 60, that leaves enough passes for Cooks to be a super viable threat. Ferguson's also back as well, so that's a little bit concerning in the market as well. If Lamb isn't hurt, that market closes a little bit more for Cooks, and Cooks is going to have to be super efficient with his 4 catches. He hasn't been a huge, just coming back here, Jesse, looking at the targets that he's received. He's had a 20% target share. So looking at that last week when he returned, 20% target share, 22% first read target. He went 3 for 7. All right. So let's just, since this is a deep dive, Joe, and we have a couple questions remaining here from Zai and Quincy before we have to go in the next 15 minutes. Let's just do some quick maths. Let's assume that Cooper Rush can throw 32 times in this game. Okay. And let's say that Cooks gets 22% of that 32. Do that math for us, please.
Give me those numbers again real quick.
32 passes with a 22% target share.
22 or 32?
Yes.
Looking at basically 6 to 7.
Okay. That's what he got last time, 7 targets. If you bump that down to 25, okay, I want to look up on team rankings.
22% of 25 is 4 or 5.
Okay. So I want to see how many, and I believe the Bengals were one of the highest teams in terms of plays allowed. Okay. I don't know the exact number, but I want to say, so it's 29. They allow 29.5 rushes per game, and approximately 34 passes per game. So we can probably conservatively put Cooper Rush between 28 to 35 pass attempts. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Brandon Cooks should be locked in to around 4 to 9 targets, regardless of injury. Now, with a completion percentage of sub 60, okay, you're looking at potentially 21-ish, 22-ish passes completed. So it's viable. That's viable. And I think that Lamb is viable as well. So if you're worried about the injury to Lamb and you'd rather roll Cooks, there is inherent risk in both, but I am okay with either of them. I know that's a long way to go about it, but the maths. It's been mathing all week when you look at this, and you take that standard deviation where you take where he's capable of going to where he's at to where the team is at. I mean, it's very viable that they end up getting 24 touches to Dowdle, like I said, maybe 26 touches to Dowdle, and the rest. I mean, it's very possible that Lamb could dictate some of those targets a little bit more too. So, that's kind of where we're at. Zai, we're good. Hopefully you're good too with the bye locked up. I love that with second place, but we'll play against the higher seed. Just praying no one gets hurt. Man, it was rough again this week. Receiver core actually puts up points. Tyreek, Reed, MHJ, Worthy, Westbrook, Ikine. That's the thing, Zai. When we look at this week, Reed had a dud, an absolute dud. Schematically, it was a great matchup. Schematically, he should have blew it out of the water. But again, one of the things we talked about last week was the fact that it's so difficult to determine what Reed's going to do in a game. He could go for one, he could have one target, he could have 6 targets. But it feels like outside of the touchdown that probably would have been his on the Christian Watson, penalty, that he just wasn't part of the action. And it was a Christian Watson kind of performance. When I look at your team here, and I ask myself, is anybody worth picking up? We have talked about these guys for a while. Dobbs is still in concussion protocol. I believe Wicks ended up getting a little bit dinged up in that game as well. So as we look at what's available to you here, Zai, Watson is kind of a good starting point to think about, that if schematically the matchup favors Watson, LaFleur understands this and might not necessarily have to feature either Reed or Watson. I think both of those guys, if you own them in tandem, are going to be super frustrating to own together, because the viability of both hinges on how LaFleur is going to read, is going to coach, and how how this offense is going to read these what's happening here. I think that, Zai, you have super volatility in the wide receiver market, but those wide receivers don't make your volatility any better.
That's a good way of putting it. Bob, what happened right there? I have no idea what happened right there, Bob. I think you might have died on me again.
All right, have to.
All right, you're back.
I don't know. Somebody's running the vacuum, and apparently when the vacuum runs, our Wi-Fi goes. I'm in the basement after all, so I mean.
That must be the common thread here, man.
So quick hit. Start my team: 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 3 flexes. My initial Monday lean, as you know, we'll get a little bit more information for you as the week goes on, Quincy. But my initial Monday lean is that I'm definitely leaning into Kyren. I haven't looked at any of the matchups yet. My initial lean is to lean into Kyren and lean into Brian Robinson, for sure. Kamara doesn't have the potential right now to get me touchdowns, and I don't want him. If he doesn't have the potential to get the touchdowns, I'm not rocking with him. Bucky, You know how I
Mhm.
love Bucky, but the back injury is bad. He came in, wasn't fully healthy. It turned out that he didn't play a full game. I started him myself, and I started Reed myself as well. Total 3.8 points. When I had Charbonnet on the bench, I picked him up, but I didn't have any room to start him because I wasn't taking out Saquon, I wasn't taking out Bijan, etc. So I think that you can't walk into the week knowing that Bucky is hurt and confidently start him. He could have a flu game and all that stuff, but again, that needs to be said. So I think I'm solidly on Kyren and Brian Robinson on my Monday lean. The Saints have a terrible rush defense, and the Niners, while good, definitely a potential to really lay into them there. And Braylon Allen with Davis there isn't super trustworthy, and Davis got the red zone looks this week. I'm not too confident about Braylon Allen in that respect. As it goes to the wide receivers here, I think that Myers is a safe play, and I think that he's going to continue to be a safe play. The volume is there even with Ritter. When Ritter came into the game, his volume was a little bit better. He got, I believe he got 4 receptions after Ritter came in. And Aiden O'Connell was featuring him a little bit on the first couple of drives, but they were just mistake rating. So I think you lean into Myers there. Debo is untrustworthy. Debo could go off, but Debo's an untrustworthy candidate right now. As it goes to the Cardinals, I think that MHJ is a good play. He's probably going to get Christian Gonzalez, though. We'll see how that shakes down. And MVS was getting a little bit of looks too, but again, if he doesn't have Derek Carr there, his value tanks. It absolutely tanks because we know that Rattler and Hainer can't get him the ball where he needs to make plays. And then the Levis injury, before that, Westbrook-Akine was not really featured a lot. But Westbrook, again, double weeks in a row where Westbrook-Akine's matchup is going to be stellar. It's going to be a stellar matchup. So I could see myself walking into Myers and MHJ as my 2 wide receivers. And then, of course, starting Westbrook in the flex, Kamara in the flex just because of usage, and probably Braylon Allen. Probably Braylon Allen would be my lean there. And I think Joe probably won't have much variation in that either.
No, not really. You pretty much nailed it.
With Pickens out probably the rest of the playoffs, who should I flex next week? Amari, Odunze, or Tracy? Nihil, one of the things that we said before you joined us, I believe, was the fact that the volume since the coaching change for Odunze is there where you want it to be. It's just will Caleb get him the ball? I believe it's like 10 or 11 targets over the last, in each of the last 3 games or something like that since the coach change.
And I don't know if you can do Tracy against Baltimore.
Yeah, that would be tough,
especially if Neighbors is out.
Looking at the matchup, the Vikings just got obliterated by Mooney a couple of times, and London still had a good enough game too. So I'm rocking Odunze there, and then with the Bills, Amari had a good game. Joe called that Amari was going to have a good game. In a dome. Well, this week is in a dome too, Joe.
It is. I thought they were on the home for the rest of the year.
No, it's against the Lions in a dome.
Oh, it's in Detroit. So, that could be a big game.
So, Nihil, I think my initial lean is Odunze because of the targets, but Amari did look good. In terms of the production that he got this week. Magic, I have 138.38 with Jamar left, and opponent has 138.62 with CD and Ari left. Do you think I lost? I think you have a good chance to win that game. I don't know. I think you won, dude. There's a pathway that Chase could put up 25 points. And the CD
possibility Aubrey gives you -4 too. That's right, CC. I love kickers.
CD's injury does play a role there. Joe caught on to the subliminal kicker shade on my roster this week. Went with a gut and took Jason Sanders. Check the box scores, Big Joe. He carried more weight than McBride this week. Yeah, he did.
Kickers still don't count.
He did. Joe, sometimes, CC, we talked about this. You kind of just have to go with what you're feeling on the kicker margin and eat it sometimes. Kickers are why there are some kickers that are predictable because their offenses suck, but again, it is very interesting to think about kickers. I learned
I
this
still
week, just
say by
play the
this time of
studs.
the year, just get the ones in the better
Mhm.
situation. Get the ones in the domes, and then
I
go from
started
there.
somebody, Austin, who was it? I started someone because the matchup was great and benched the stud. It didn't work out well for me, even though
Dude, Westbrook
sometimes it's the right
Akine.
call. It's just better to play the studs. Yeah, that
In general,
again,
yeah.
in general, Austin, this is a great description to have. But I know in our community itself, the guys that have started Hill all year have walked out of that discussion saying that I'm not better off in that discussion than I was at the start. People that in order for this to ring true, the studs have to be studly enough. And when I
Yeah.
say that, I'm talking about a guy like Puka Nacua, where he can supersede a bad matchup. I'm talking about guys like Jamar Chase, where Austin, come on, man. We love you, man. But when you look at it, you say to yourself, okay, this past week,
Mike
Saquon
Williams.
Barkley. Saquon Barkley had a studly matchup. He should have went off for 30 points. And the Eagles almost lost that game in the box score, right?
Yeah.
They almost lost that game. And so you ask yourself, it's like, okay, and if you would have been starting AJ Brown all year, you would be losing right now. I mean, it's just there is a discussion to be had, and we do this often every single week, where we talk about the studs versus the potentials, and it's all based upon volume, target share, potential in the red zone. There are so many metrics, guys, that goes into what makes a player potentially, if I'm going to start him, it's not just about the matchup. It's about the matchup with the volume and all this stuff. I thought Jalen Hurts was going to have a bad game because I thought Saquon was just going to be running the whole time. Austin, it happens,
Oh,
brother.
a
I mean,
quarterback mistake. I'm
but here's
hearing
the thing,
Levis.
Austin.
He's
Here's
dead
the
to
thing,
me.
Austin. Levis is dead to us. Levis is dead to us. AOC is dead to me. CJ Stroud similarly is dead to me as well. And here's the
Well, at
thing.
least he has a
I
reason. He was on a bye.
in DFS this week. I paid up. I paid up for Jalen Hurts. And Austin, you weren't one of the only people. The chalk play in DFS lineups this week was Will Levis.
Yeah.
That was the chalk play. You go in and you see the ownership for Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. I was making as many rosters as I could with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts stunned me because I could have made an equally better roster with Sam Darnold or Josh Allen. Sam Darnold, was on the discussion list for me, and so was Josh Allen. Playing the right combination, it's all about that. And sometimes we get a little bit too cute, right? And Joe and I talk about that. But the cuteness does have a point when the matchup dictates and the volume dictates and the yards per route run, all that dictate that that's going to be a smart play. Again, it didn't work this week, but there are going to be weeks where it does work. Joe, we can go back to KJ a couple weeks. What was it, the fourth week that Juwan Jennings had that 32-point game and he ended up playing Juwan Jennings. It was a cute play. It ended up hitting. So, I mean, like,
it hit.
We all did. We all did.
Yeah, I did.
Everybody, you read any article, you read anything that any other content creator is putting out there, and undeniably, Will Levis was one of the top options.
I thought they were going to blow him out.
You look at the ownership, Joe. Will Levis was one of the top owned quarterbacks. And guess who was also in the top 5? AOC. Both of them were in the top 5.
Well, AOC got hurt. Levis just didn't perform. I mean, AOC at least has legit reason.
I mean,
but at any rate, guys, fundamental conclusion, we need Cooks to go off tonight. Local football flavor as a unit needs Cooks to go off tonight. We'll answer CC's last question here, and then we're going to call it one.
No, we can't. I mean, looking at both of these guys, CC, if Breece is designated healthy and Bucky is designated healthy, which one of these do I rather trust? Well, Bucky's back injury is trickier, I think, than what Breece. But man, I don't trust either of them right now.
I can't trust the Jets.
I can't. I can't trust Brees or Bucky knowing that both of the running backs were viable without, like, especially on Brees' side, that both of those running backs were viable without him. They don't have to play him. They don't have to play him. Let's go, Austin. Love that. Let's go. 3:45 tomorrow, everybody.
Welcome to Local Football Flavor, connecting the fan bases of the NFL.